From the pristine floor-to-ceiling bay window of her Buckhead mansion, Margaret DuPont watched the one thing that spoiled the perfect November view: a rusty, faded blue 1990s-era Ford Escort sputtering up her cobblestone driveway. Margaret sighed, checking the gold watch on her thin wrist. Her lower back gave a familiar, dull twinge of annoyance. She simply didn't have time for issues. She had the annual Foundation Gala to plan, the absolute crown jewel of the Atlanta charity season, and this new distraction was her part-time help, arriving for her first day. The Escort parked neatly to the side of the garage, far from Margaret's own silver Mercedes. Margaret watched, half expecting to see a puddle of oil form on her pristine cobbles. When none appeared, she didn't feel relief, just continued suspicion. A moment later, a woman emerged. Grace Washington. Mid-50s, black, dressed in simple, clean slacks and a pressed polo shirt. She moved with a calm, dignified purpose. Grace entered through the side door, precisely as instructed in the agency email. Margaret was waiting in the immaculate kitchen, which smelled of expensive potpourri and lemon oil. The interior of the home was all creams, golds, and dark, polished woods. "You're here," Margaret stated, her voice clipped. "Good." She didn't offer a smile, only a tight nod. "I am Margaret DuPont." Grace met her gaze evenly, her own expression serene. "Good morning, Mrs. DuPont." "It's a pleasure." "I'm Grace Washington." Margaret's eyes flickered back toward the driveway, visible through the kitchen window. "My goodness," she said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of false Southern politeness. "Are you certain that the vehicle is reliable? We prioritize punctuality above all else here, Grace." "I do hope it won't be a problem." Grace didn't flinch. "It won't be a problem, ma'am. It's a very dependable car." Well, we shall see." Margaret turned, gesturing for Grace to follow. The tour. She led Grace through the sprawling home, pointing out duties with excessive, almost forensic scrutiny. The silver must be polished with the grain, not against it. Use the lemon oil for the mahogany, the wax for the oak. And you must be finished in the main wing before 1 o'clock, as I do my calls then. She paused by the grand dining room, gesturing to the heavy, dark furniture. "We have Thanksgiving in 2 weeks, and more importantly, the Foundation Gala shortly after. Everything must be perfect." She said the word perfect as if it were a threat. Grace simply nodded, observant, taking in the instructions without complaint. She had heard this tone before in many other places. It did not anger her, it simply was. As Grace began the methodical work of polishing the antique silver in the dining room, Margaret retreated to her study. She left the door open, picked up her phone and dialed, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Evelyn, darling, yes, I know. I'm swamped." A pause. "You're right, it is just impossible to find good help these days. But at least this one seems quiet." Margaret thinks she's just quiet help, but we know Grace's story is only beginning. If you are still watching and finding value in this story, please comment with the number 8 below to let us know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we invite you to join the Black King family. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter of this journey. Your support helps us continue to create powerful content designed to inform and inspire you. Now let's continue. As the weeks passed, the November chill deepened, and so did the invisible line Margaret DuPont drew between herself and the woman quietly polishing her hardwood floors. Grace Washington continued to arrive precisely on time every Tuesday and Thursday in her rusty Escort. The car's reliability was a silent rebuke to Margaret's initial judgment, though Margaret never acknowledged it. She was far too consumed by the upcoming gala and the stress it placed on her social standing. This stress was peaking on a cold afternoon in mid-November. Grace was quietly dusting the leather-bound books in Margaret's immaculate home office, moving with silent efficiency. Margaret was at her desk, pacing, her speakerphone blaring. "What do you mean they haven't responded?" Margaret's voice was sharp, aimed at some unfortunate committee member on the line. "We must secure the Washington Foundation. They are the biggest private donor in the state, and the gala is falling apart without them. Why won't they RSVP? Do they know who I am?" Grace paused her dusting for a fraction of a second, her face impassive. Margaret slammed the end call button, letting out a heavy, frustrated sigh. She glanced at Grace, who was now dusting a silver-framed photo of Margaret with the mayor. "It's charity work, Grace," Margaret said, as if explaining complex physics to a child. "You wouldn't understand the pressure. It's about securing our city's legacy." She forced a thin smile. "Bless your heart. It's all very complicated." Grace simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am," and moved to the next shelf. She felt a small, familiar pang of pity. It wasn't anger. It was pity for a woman so trapped in her own narrow, gilded world. Later that afternoon, Margaret, preoccupied and reviewing a catering list, rushed out of her study and almost collided with Grace, who was carrying a vase. "Oh, goodness, Grace, you startled me," Margaret snapped, clutching her pearls. "You're so quiet. I forget you're even here." The implication was clear. Grace was furniture, invisible, not a person to be accounted for. Margaret continued down the hall, still muttering over the catering. Grace watched her go, studying the vase. Just then, Margaret stopped, turned, and marched back. Her eyes narrowed on a spot on the hall window. She had been stressed about the foundation, and now she had a target. "Is that a smudge?" she asked, her voice sharp. Grace looked. It was barely visible. "Please, Grace, try to focus," Margaret snapped. "Some of us have real problems to deal with." The day before Thanksgiving, the bright Atlanta autumn vanished, replaced by a sudden, violent rainstorm that turned the roads slick and dark, a typical, treacherous Georgia downpour. Margaret DuPont barely noticed. She was in her study, flustered and furious, having just had her secretary fail, for the third time, to get a direct line to the director of the elusive Washington Foundation. "Just tell them who I am," she had snapped, before slamming the phone down. Her custom monogrammed Thanksgiving napkins hadn't arrived, and the thought of using store-bought ones was humiliating. Driven by this stress, she grabbed her keys, ignoring the weather. "I'll get them myself," she muttered, rushing out in her new silver Mercedes. The rain was torrential, a sheet of gray water that overwhelmed the wipers. Margaret, distracted and angry, sped along a winding, secluded road on the outskirts of Buckhead. Her phone buzzed in the console, another gala organizer, no doubt. "What now?" she hissed, glancing down at the screen. In that split second, she didn't see the patch of slick, wet leaves covering the asphalt on the curve. The Mercedes hydroplaned. Margaret screamed as the heavy car lost traction, sliding gracefully, unstoppably, toward the shoulder. It ended with a sickening thud and a splash of muddy water as the car slid awkwardly into a deep ditch, the front passenger tire slamming into a hidden rock. Silence, broken only by the drumming rain and the thwack-thwack of the wipers. Margaret was breathing hard, her heart hammering. She tried to reverse. The wheels spun uselessly, whining in the mud. She checked her phone. The screen glowed with 2 words, "No service." A cold panic, sharper than the November air, seized her. She was trapped. In the ditch. In the pouring rain. Her luxury car, her fortress, was now just a cold, useless box. A few cars passed on the road above, their taillights disappearing into the storm, oblivious. No one was stopping. She felt utterly helpless, her age and the damp cold settling deep into her bones. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour. She was about to lay her head on the steering wheel in defeat when a pair of dim, yellow headlights appeared. They slowed, then pulled over slowly and carefully onto the muddy shoulder behind her. It was the unmistakable silhouette of the rusty 90s Ford Escort. Margaret watched, frozen, as Grace Washington grabbed a large black umbrella from her back seat, stepped out into the storm, and walked calmly toward her. Grace didn't hesitate. She tapped gently on Margaret's driver's side window, her face calm and unbothered by the rain washing over her. "Mrs. DuPont?" Grace asked, her voice steady and kind, somehow carrying over the roar of the storm. "It looks like you could use some help. Margaret is trapped, helpless in her luxury car, and the very woman she looked down on is now her only hope. What will Grace do next?" If you are still watching and finding value in this powerful story, please comment with the number 8 below to let us know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you truly don't want to miss what happens in that storm. We invite you to join the Black King family. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this journey. Your support helps us continue to create powerful content designed to inform and inspire you. Now, let's get back to that rainy road. Margaret DuPont sat, stunned and shivering, in the passenger seat of the 90s Ford Escort, a car she realized, with a jolt of shame, was surprisingly warm and immaculately clean on the inside. Grace didn't mention Margaret's previous attitude. She simply reached into the back seat and offered Margaret a thermos of hot tea. "Drink this, Mrs. DuPont. You'll catch a chill." The tea was high quality, surprisingly aromatic. Margaret took it, her hands still shaking. Grace calmly stepped back out into the rain with her umbrella to assess the Mercedes. She returned, shaking her head. "That tire is flat, and the car is stuck deep. My Escort can't tow a vehicle that heavy." Margaret felt a fresh wave of despair. "No signal," she said, her voice hollow. "I know," Grace said. She took out her own phone, an older model, but it worked perfectly. She dialed a number, and almost instantly, Margaret heard her speak. "Yes, hello. I'm on West Paces Ferry, just past the curve. Yes, a silver Mercedes in the ditch. It will need a winch." Grace calmly gave their location, citing a private roadside service Margaret had never even heard of. Not AAA. Something more exclusive and efficient. They waited, in near silence, for over an hour until the tow truck arrived. Grace talked calmly about the storm, about the traffic, but never about work or the accident. She created a space of dignity and respect, as if they were peers weathering a shared inconvenience. When the tow truck driver arrived, Grace was the one who stepped out into the rain to handle the explanation. Margaret stumbled out of the Escort. As her Mercedes was being winched onto the truck, she remembered herself. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out a wrinkled $20 bill. "For your trouble, Grace." "Thank you." Grace looked at the money, then at Margaret's face. She gently pushed her hand back. "That's not necessary, ma'am. I'm just glad you're safe. I'll see you next week." Margaret was left standing in her driveway, soaking wet, holding the $20 bill, utterly speechless as the rusty car's taillights disappeared down the street. A deep, unfamiliar shame burned hotter than the November cold. Thanksgiving passed in a blur of forced smiles and awkwardness. Margaret was, for the first time, almost deferential to Grace, who simply acted as if the storm rescue had never happened. The awkwardness lingered into the following week. When Grace arrived for her shift, Margaret hurried to the door, her usual lady of the manor poise completely gone. "Good morning, Grace. Can I get you some coffee? I made a fresh pot." Grace smiled politely. "No, thank you, Mrs. DuPont. I brought my own." Margaret was flustered. She didn't know how to act. This woman had saved her from a dangerous situation, yet she was still the help. Mrs. DuPont hovered awkwardly for a moment, then retreated to her office, where her real nightmare was waiting, the Foundation Gala. The gala was tomorrow night. Margaret was in her office, finalizing the seating chart. She picked up the phone, making one last desperate call to the committee. "Listen," she said, her voice low and strained. "Just tell the director of the Washington Foundation that Margaret DuPont begs them to attend. Their presence is vital for our donations." Grace was cleaning nearby, the vacuum humming on its low setting. Margaret hung up, sighing, rubbing her temples. This migraine had been plaguing her for a week. "You wouldn't believe the stress, Grace," Margaret said suddenly, almost to herself. "This gala, everything rides on it. We're honoring the Washington Foundation, and they haven't even confirmed they'll be there." Grace switched off the vacuum. The room fell silent. "I'm sure it will be a wonderful evening, Mrs. DuPont." The simple calmness in Grace's voice only irritated Margaret more. That evening, before Grace left, Margaret held 2 envelopes. One was Grace's weekly pay. The other was a last-minute, hand-delivered invitation to the gala for the director of the Washington Foundation, a final attempt to entice them. She handed Grace the pay envelope, completely oblivious that the woman in front of her should be receiving both. The ballroom at the Intercontinental Buckhead shimmered with crystal and gold. Atlanta's wealthiest citizens, dressed in tuxedos and gowns, mingled under the soft light, and Margaret DuPont felt the familiar thrill of a perfectly executed event. She stood near the stage in her designer gown, smiling and greeting guests. The mayor had arrived, shaking her hand. "Marvelous Margaret, as always," he said. She felt proud, the stress of the past weeks melting away. This was her world. This was where she belonged. The time came for the keynote address from their surprise guest of honor, the reclusive, media-shy founder of the Washington Foundation, who had finally agreed to come. Margaret stepped to the podium, beaming. She cleared her throat. "And now," she began, her voice echoing through the hushed room. "It is my profound honor to introduce the heart and soul of our philanthropic community, a true Atlanta legend, the founder of the Washington Foundation." The ballroom doors opened. Margaret looked up, her smile freezing on her face. In walked Grace Washington. She was not in her simple work clothes, but in an elegant, deep blue gown, diamonds glittering at her throat. She was poised, confident, and radiant. Instantly, the attendees, who knew her true identity, burst into thunderous applause. Margaret stood paralyzed, her face draining of all color. She had to physically grip the podium to stop her hands from shaking. Hundreds of faces were turned to her, waiting. Grace walked onto the stage. She smiled warmly at the crowd, then turned to Margaret, who was still stunned. Grace extended her hand. Mechanically, Margaret lifted her own cold hand and took Grace's. Grace Washington leaned into the microphone, her smile unwavering. "Thank you, Margaret, for that warm introduction. It's truly a pleasure to be here tonight." Margaret stumbled back, clutching the podium, as the entire ballroom rose to their feet in a standing ovation for the woman she knew only as the old maid in the rusty car. In the quiet hush of that Atlanta ballroom, a profound truth was revealed, not with a shout, but with the simple, dignified presence of Grace Washington. It serves as a powerful reminder that we must never judge a person's worth by the car they drive or the uniform they wear. For often, the greatest value is hidden within the humblest exterior, waiting for a chance to show its grace. Perhaps her story reminds us to look closer at the people we pass by every day. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing that warmth with someone in your own community.